Alright, good evening everybody. Welcome. This evening we're going to talk about poetry. Specifically, poems of enlightened women. That's that week. I'm going to be drawing from this book this week, which is the Chinese. I've got two books. One is from Chinese tradition and one is from the Indian tradition. This is Daughters of Emptiness. And as I was looking at poems from this, I was really struck by the difference between the way they're put together and the poems in this, which is our other book, the Therigatha, First Buddhist Women. You'll remember from some of the poems we read out of this last time round that they're very much written from the time and the place of the women. So there's the story of the mother who, carrying her kids home, her husband had died, she was going home, and so there's the whole marriage story to start with, and then one kid drowned and the other kid drowned, she lost everything. There's stories of a woman who was her father's wife. These are all very much in a culture in which over the 500 years before the time they were written, women had lost pretty much all their rights. There was a tradition there where women were somewhat empowered, and the Aryan culture just eliminated all of that. And so they're very much written from that place. These poems, on the other hand, are not. They're very much written without a gender identity, a gender role. So I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes on that point first, and then we'll read some of these poems and explore them. There's just some lovely poems in here. So Buddhism is kind of a funny thing, because in that the teaching itself is so clearly without reference to any identity, whether race, gender, whatever. It's clearly without any regard to any of that. And yet the way it shows up is so clearly anchored on those things. The teachings themselves, as they come down to us, as we've talked about, dominantly male voices. While it has shifted dramatically in recent years, we still, in this country and in the West in general, have a majority of male teachers, a majority of white teachers, right? So it's still very much those roles, historical roles, somehow or other still roll forward and impact decisions. A lot has changed, but there's still a way to go. And it does seem interesting to me how much, I mean, I can't say I notice this every moment, but I do notice it a lot. I can show up pretty much anywhere and people will pay attention to me. I talk in most environments and most people will shut up and let me talk because I'm a straight white male and I've got some grey hairs. And I'm aware of that role. I'm aware of residual identity there. I try to be very careful with that identity, but it can actually be useful at times. But culturally, we just have a really hard time with this. And while we're making great progress on some dimensions, on others, as the current generation opens up the definitions and experiences of gender identity and gender roles, there's an awful lot of our culture has a really hard time with a lot of that. And on both sides of that, there's a lot of identity formation. And identity formation is all about ego. Identity formation causes suffering. So we can explore that when we talk. I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes on it, but as I say, what I primarily is to draw out that these poems are written from a place where I mean, I'm sure there are places where you say, you missed this, and I immediately see the word the wandering nun, which is a specific gender, right? But for the most part, these are without that. These are just enlightened people. These poems come from the Song dynasty, which is 960 to 1279, and the early to mid-Ming, which takes us up to... Oh no, I'm not going that far. What am I talking about? The Yuan dynasty, which takes us into the middle of the 14th century. So it's a long span, and once again demonstrates how little of this record remains. They're all written by women from the upper classes within Chinese society at that time, because those are the only people who had access to the kind of education which would allow one to write in the very stylized poetic scripts and so forth. So acknowledge that up front. All right, let's read a couple of these. So this is by Sen Ryu, the daughter of, her name is Sen Ru. Today she is a Buddhist nun Ru. Yesterday she was teacher Wang. Although born to wear silken gauze, she now wears only the roughest hemp. Mouths that open and spew out lofty talk have no interest at all in becoming Buddhas. Leap out of the cauldron of right and wrong, cut off completely the road of life and death, then enter the tiger's lair and demon's palace with a heart that feels not the slightest fear. The made-up nonsense of 8 young sutras easily adds up to 3,000 chapters. I am fond of chanting poems that have no rhymes, and I can't be bothered with counting syllables. This wandering nun had travelled the world, investigated Chan, but was not yet enlightened until recently I found my way to Cloud Gate, where I immediately encountered total defeat. I'd mistaken the shape of a mortal pestle, thinking it was a winter melon gourd. Having gone through all this just to be a nun, I urge you not to feel jealous of me. Is there anything else that I've got wrong? If so, then do tell me what it may be. When the elephant of Jashu eats steaming brown, the iron ox of Shanfu suffers a distended belly. This is easy to see. So I'll read it one more time with a couple of comments. So she was born in this, one of her roles was as a teacher, so she left the silken gauze and put on the hemp of a nun. Today she is Buddhist nun Ru. Yesterday she was teacher Wang. Although born to wear silken gauze, she now wears only the roughest hemp. Mouths that open and spew out lofty talk have no interest at all in becoming Buddhas. Leap out of the cauldron of right and wrong, cut off completely the road of life and death, then enter tiger's lair and demon's palace with a heart that feels not the slightest fear. The greatest gift is the gift of fearlessness. Gifts of the world, gifts of the Dhamma, gifts of fearlessness, and jumping beyond life and death. These are all fairly standard metaphors. The next chunk is about not getting caught up in structures. This is the structure of the poem. You can see it maybe on the screen. It's just this block script of 5 characters. Very rigid structure. And I'm sure there's a lot of structure in that that's not clear to me. This made-up nonsense of the 8 young sutras easily adds up to 3,000 chapters. That's throw the commentaries away. I am fond of chanting poems that have no rhymes, and I can't be bothered with counting syllables. All that stuff. This wandering nun had travelled the world, investigated Chan, but was not yet enlightened until recently I found my way to Cloud Gate, which I believe is a reference to Umon, who was one of the founders of one of the 5 schools of Zen, where I immediately encountered total defeat, which is to say the bottom dropped out. She woke up. I'd mistaken the shape of a mortar pestle, thinking it was a winter melon gourd. So that's the tool which woke her up. Having gone through all this just to be a nun, I urge you not to feel jealous of me. Is there anything else that I've got wrong? If so, then do tell me what it may be. When the elephant of Jashu eats steaming brown, the iron ox of Shanfu suffers a distended belly. That is a common style of trope that talks about the It refers to the interbeing of everything, you know, the Indra's net kind of symbolism. Everything's connected to everything else. This is easy to see.
Could you say slowly the words that kind of ran together, this thing about Joshu's elephant and the steaming brown what?
When the elephant of Jiazhu, Jiazhou, Jiazhu,
Okay.
when the elephant of Jiazhu eats steaming bran,
okay, eat steaming bran, okay.
the iron ox of Shanfu suffers a distended belly.
Okay.
So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to read a few more, and then we'll pause, and you can say, "I like that one. Can we go over that one?" Yeah. All day long. No, we're not going to do that. So this is by De Ying, who came from a well-known elite family. I try to characterize myself, but can't seem to do it. I try to sketch a self-portrait, but with no success. There is no such thing as the original form. But how can it be made to look like a person? Alive and lovely, it was never born. As always, the nostrils hang over the upper lip. I think that's straightforward. I'll read it one more time. I try to characterize myself, but can't seem to do it. I try to sketch a self-portrait, but with no success. There is such a thing as the original form, but how can it be made to look like a person? Alive and lively, it was never born. As always, the nostrils hang over the upper lip. So the next three are from Xitong, who came from a famous scholar official family. Since there is nothing that exists, what are you bathing? If there is even a speck of dust, from where does it arise? If you produce a single profound phrase, then everyone can come in and bathe. The most the ancient ones can do is scrub your back. When has a bodhisattva ever illuminated anyone's mind? If you want to realize the stage beyond impurity, you should sweat from every last pore of your body. It is said that water is able to wash away impurities, but how do you know that the water is also not dirty? Even if you erase the distinction between water and dirt, when you come in here, you must still be sure to bathe. So this is a very dense one, and there's a lot of references in here, and the fact that I can see a handful of references means there's a ton more that I'm missing. So one of these references is to a koan in this collection, which is the Blue Cliff Record, which I will read you. And the point that I'm going to be getting to is actually a quote that for some reason I remember out of the Denko Roku, which is another koan collection, and that quote is simply, "Water is not wet. Water is not wet." I remember it because one time I read it and it's like, it just knocked me over. Water is not wet. Because it isn't. We make water wet. It's our perspective, our view, that makes water wet. Water is just water. In fact, water isn't even water, because once I name it, I've already taken it away from what it is. It's the, what is this? Water is not wet. In olden times there were 16 bodhisattvas. When it was time for monks to wash, the bodhisattvas filed in to bathe. Suddenly they awakened to the basis of water. All of you Chan-worthies, how will you understand their saying, subtle feeling reveals illumination? And we have achieved the station of sons of Buddha. And we have achieved the station of sons of Buddha. To realize this, you must be extremely piercing and penetrating. Suddenly they were awakened to the basis of water. How will you understand their saying? Subtle feeling reveals illumination, and we have achieved the station of sons of Buddha. So that, I think, is the feeling that is being captured in a lot of this about the water. Water is not wet, and we've got this experience of bathing going on here. Since there is nothing that exists, what are you bathing? If there is even a speck of dust, from where does it arise? Most famously, that whole structure comes out of a verse of Huineng in the the Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch. Huineng, the poem he wrote was, there is no mirror, there is not even a speck of dust to a light. The dust is our delusions and our sufferings, and as we chant in the Heart Sutra, there is no suffering. There is no end of suffering. There is no suffering. It's just simply realizing that it's all the story. It's not actually taking away what it is, the suchness of what it is, but is recognizing that it is us that makes it suffering. Since there is nothing that exists, what are you bathing? If there is even a speck of dust, from where does it arise? If you produce a single profound phrase, then everyone can come in and bathe. And that's a Zen trope as well, where the master is paralyzed because somebody asks them a trick question, and the master can't think of a skillful way to respond. I've forgotten his name, but the guy, the Diamond Sutra scholar, who was walking up to the monastery with his sack of scrolls on his back, and he stopped at the little stall to ask to get some breakfast, and he said, can I give me some breakfast, please? And in Chinese, the characters that represent breakfast also represent feeding the mind. And so the woman said to him, which mind are you feeding? The past mind can't be found, the present mind can't be found, and the future mind can't be found. Which is a quote from the Diamond Sutra, and it completely floored him. So he burned all the scrolls and started the game from scratch. That's the kind of thing this is alluding to. That single profound phrase which eluded him there, that is the phrase of freedom. If we produce a single profound phrase, then everyone can come in and bathe. The most the ancient ones can do is scrub your back. When has a bodhisattva ever illuminated anyone's mind? You have to do the work yourself. Nobody can do it for you. You have to do it yourself. If you want to realize the stage beyond impurity, you should sweat from every last pore of your body, which is, that's from the Mumonkan, and that's just the level of intensity that the monks would engage in when they were working with the koans. It is said that water is able to wash away impurities, but how do you know that the water is also not dirty? Well, if we see it as water, then it is, right? We've already defiled it. Even if you erase the distinction between water and dirt, when you come in here, you must still be sure to bathe. I think there's two meanings to that. One is after the ecstasy of the laundry. I mean, yes, and now come back and live. Right? Eat your breakfast, wash the dishes. And although this is true for that spiritual, for the awakening experience, you still have to do the work. Alright, the next one. Within the vast expanse of dust, essentially a single suchness. Whether vertical or horizontal, everything bears the seal of Vairocana. Although the entire wave is made of water, the wave is not the water. Although all of the water may turn into waves, the water is still itself. So this, of course, is the simile or metaphor of us being the waves that rise out of the water and subside back into the water. And it's the same valence of water. There's another thing that I brought in to read here, which is, this is Dongshan, who was one of the founders of the Soto sect. And there was a tradition at the time that after a profound awakening experience, you would write a poem. This is his awakening poem. And it's about suchness, which is why I brought this in. Just don't seek it from others, or you'll be far estranged from self. I go on alone, everywhere I meet it. It is now me, I am not it. One must understand in this way to merge with suchness. I'll read that again. Just don't seek from others, or you'll be far estranged from the self. I go on alone, everywhere I meet it. It now is me, I now am not it. One must understand in this way to merge with suchness. So, Shitong's poem again. Within the vast expanse of dust, essentially a single suchness, whether vertical or horizontal. That's not the one I was reading, is it? Yes, it is. I'm sorry. Yes, it is. Within the vast expanse of dust, essentially a single suchness, whether vertical or horizontal, everything bears the seal of Vairakana. And the vertical and horizontal is vertical alignment, heaven and earth, horizontal alignment, compassion, merit on this plane. And the seal of Vairakana is Buddha Dharma, is Dharmakaya, what am I trying to say? Dharmakaya, the of the three bodies, the body of Buddha, the transcendent body of Buddha. Within the vast expanse of dust, essentially a single suchness, whether vertical or horizontal, everything bears the seal of Vairakana. Although the entire wave is made of water, the wave is not the water. Although all of the water may turn into waves, the water is still itself. I'll read one more and then we'll leave that last one for next time, which is the last poem that this from this one person, Shitong. Subject and object from the start are no different. The myriad things, nothing but images in the mirror. Bright and refulgent, transcending both guest and host, complete and realized, all is permeated by the Absolute. A single form encompasses the multitude of dharmas, all of which are interconnected within the net of Indra. Layer after layer, there is no point at which it all ends. Whether in motion or still, all is fully interpenetrating. So I'll read that one again. Subject and object from the start are no different. The myriad things, nothing but images in the mirror. Bright and refulgent, transcending both guest and host. Complete and realized, all is permeated by the Absolute. A single form encompasses the multitude of dharmas, all of which are interconnected within the net of Indra. Layer after layer, there is no point at which it all ends. Whether in motion or still, all is fully interpenetrating. I won't say explanatory words on that, but I want to note that it is extraordinarily erudite and it clearly draws very deeply from the Huayan philosophy. That's one of the precise terms in there. They're not, you don't need to know the Huayan philosophy to access it, but that's what it's really drawing from. So this is, these poems could come out of any of the great Zen collections as far as I can see. So again, they're without any reference to gender role, gender identity. They're just very different from the Indian poems in that regard. So that's what I had for you, and I would love to now look up from the books and have a conversation about all of this. What does this bring up for everybody? Thoughts, comments, questions, observations? London, yeah. Sorry, I wanted you. Yes, go ahead.
The one about seeking suchness from other people? Others? First line.
So, what's the question about it? Comment about it.
Can you read that first line again? But
So the only one that I thought mentioned suchness was this one. This one. Yeah. Just don't seek from others, or you'll be far estranged from self.
okay. Hopefully it's the suchness you don't seek from others?
It. Whatever.
It.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So yes is the answer, Belinda.
Yeah, and I was thinking that some people may read that, especially if their mental health is walking a tightrope,
Mm-hmm.
and see that as an opportunity to isolate themselves.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that.
It does not.
No.
Doesn't mean that at all.
No.
There's another. So this guy is well known in the West, primarily because he is the founder of the lineage out of which Dogen Zenji came. Dogen Zenji, among other things he wrote, to study the way, the Tao, is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by the myriad dharmas and have this boundless enlightenment continuing forever kind of words. Can't remember the last bit. But he's clearly picking up on this and really reworking precisely this. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self, if you really look closely, try and see what's going on here, what really is here, you can't find anything here that isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing here that isn't non-self. To study way to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self.
Right.
And to truly forget the self in that way is to truly see what this is.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary, and that's the enlightenment experience we're talking about.
And the connection to all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's like my beginning statements, the line, depending on the stability of the mental health of the person, and depression wants to isolate you.
Yeah.
Right? It wants you to feel like you're all alone.
Yes.
You're not connected with other people. And there's nothing to desire, receive from another being.
Yeah.
But it's not saying that.
That's exactly right.
But how do you?
How do you explain that?
Yeah.
Well, first off, you have to meet people where they are, right? So, this is not obvious to a lot of people. I just read a book by Rita Gross, which Charlie lent me, and in the beginning of that book, the author is talking about her early experiences. She was on a panel and somebody written a thesis paper on some aspect of Buddhism, and in that paper this idea of no self was absolutely crucial. And she said one of the other professors, these people were all well-educated people in religious studies, and one of the other people was just about to tell this person that there was no basis for this paper. She said, no, you've got to understand, this is foundational to Buddhist teaching.
Right.
So, yes, and I'm bringing that up because even at that level, it's tough. It's
Yeah.
tough. It's not obvious. So, at that level, you've got to meet somebody where they are. And also, if somebody's brain chemistry is not working in a way that is conducive to this teaching, is not working in a way that's conducive to their happiness and their some basic level of connected functioning in society, we have to deal with that first.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen a number of people who, once they've got the brain chemistry right, then engage in practice, and then over time the practice muscles build up, and they find that and this is not universal, by no means everybody, don't get me wrong, but there are many people I've found who, once those practice muscles build up and they develop that level of insight, that level of compassion and connectedness, they start letting the medications go, and they find not just that they can function without the medicines, but that their lives are just much richer.
Sure.
As a whole. But you've got to deal with the brain chemistry first.
Yeah, you got to do, and even if it's not documented as gone that far, just the imbalance of the ego can interrupt that.
It absolutely can.
So much.
So you've got to be careful. You've
Yeah.
got to be careful. And you really, rule one, meet somebody where they are.
Thank you.
What else, folks? Ken?
Yeah, it's hard to comment on poetry. Poetry evokes, it calls something out of you, and what it calls out of you is not necessarily what it's going to be calling out of somebody else. You can have discussions on them and you can give your own interpretation, but it seems to me that at the end of the day it's kind of how it makes you feel. Does it open kind of another window of perception to you? And that is getting back to this idea of being an island unto yourself, which is what we chant every morning, every Sunday morning. It's how it is affecting you, and it's like I said, it's just difficult to comment.
But yes, and how does it feel to you, Ken?
Poetry, I wind up relating it to other poems that I have read. So it's, I can't really answer the question because it's kind of a mishmash in my head, and it's kind of ineffable.
So does that mean you don't have any feelings?
Oh, I have feelings, but I mean, I can't really communicate, you know, if I can say, oh, I feel good, you know, but I mean, what would that mean to you or anybody else? It's, that's the real value of poetry.
So, within the vast expanse of dust, essentially a single suchness.
A single suchness.
Whether vertical or horizontal, everything bears the seal of Vairocana. Although the entire wave is made of water, the wave is not the water. Although all of the water may turn into waves, the water is still itself. To me, this is just it's a beautiful description of reality. It's a beautiful way of helping us see the indescribable. And it's not describing it, it's using these lovely images, and that makes me, kind of opens me up. It does transport me beyond where words can function, and it helps me feel. I find, I may be deluding myself, but I feel connected to Jitong as she was experiencing and trying to express reality. I feel connected to the peace and the beauty of her life.
When you said the water is not wet, that brought forth some other poem. I don't recall where I read it, but not only is the water not to say wet, as you say, it's giving a characteristic to it, and the characteristic is a human invention, it's a story. You know, the clear sky is not glue.
Right.
The concrete floor is not hard and solid. You know, it's, you get the imagery of characteristics as being totally artificial, an illusion. But illusion doesn't mean it doesn't have at least some reality, some relative reality. It's good definition of the word illusion is that it's a perception that is not entirely accurate, or entirely complete would be a better way to express it.
Did you have something, Clay?
I did. The verse that you picked to yank information out of Ken just now.
Yes.
Was one I wanted to talk about,
Well,
because
please.
the wave is not the thing, right?
Right.
It is a pattern within the whole, and that really resonated with me, because I was trying to explain to some other people how really, you and I are the same thing. We're just waves that have mistaken ourselves as individuals.
Yes.
We're really part of the, it's like you were saying, I can't remember, a couple weeks ago, when you were comparing it to Purisha and Prakriti. Right? It's the energy that creates the pattern, and we've just mistaken the waves for individuals. So that particular part was the thing that I latched on the most out of everything you read so far.
I think she told me as much as any, maybe even any poetry I've ever read. She does. I think these are really extraordinary poems. But all of these poems, life is just a gorgeous, beautiful mistake.
Every day.
Just a wonderful, wonderful mistake. God bless it. Yeah. Did you have something?
Yeah, I'm just a very simple person with not much
It's my wallet.
good memory. I have a real hard time after hearing all those wonderful poems, and I'm overwhelmed with all the different imagery and the illusions. I do much better when I go through one by one, because it's just too much for me. There's many things on there, like the second half of the 8th line in the 4th poem. Remember that? I can't.
I have no idea what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
exactly.
Let me rephrase. I know exactly what you mean. Yes, I do know
Yes.
exactly what you mean.
So I can't talk about the poems, because I can't. As soon as I'm like trying to really work through and savor this part, we're on to the next one, which just has many wonderful things, and so that is gone from my mind. So
Maybe next time we do poems out of this, because I think it's particularly true of this style. They're just so rich and dense. Maybe we need to find a way to slow that down.
Other people might not feel that way, but I find it really hard.
But I say the same as I said to Ken, which is there's something you can talk about, which is didn't last long, but when the poem was landing on you, did you feel yourself transported in some kind of way? Was there something?
Yeah, there were
happening
certain stanzas that were just exhilarating.
Yeah.
Many of them, and some were beautiful.
Some of this poetry is just astonishing. Kevin.
Thank you, Gareth. I love these poems. I kind of like the fire hose, drinking from the fire hose, Beth, because each one of these just really frustrates me, because they all, and I recognize that now as just myself trying to hold on and trying to find something to grab hold of to hang on to. I usually have to sleep on them, and it'll be like, tomorrow morning when I'll realize I'll have these, senses of exhilaration or anything. Right now, it's all 100% frustration, and it is totally that self piece, struggling to maintain control and keep the world upright. And I really enjoy it because I know there's no way to, you can chip away at it in meditation, but here it's laid out bare. When you see just how strong that response is, and so I also understand the original conversation. Meeting people where they are. Obviously, I've still got quite a bit of me and I and whatever I'm working with, and so. And losing that is scary at this point, and so, but it's just the process. Now, even from a year ago, it was much more scary, and so it all loosens up through the practice and just through challenging it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kevin. Clay.
Could you expound upon the stanza about the elephant and the bull?
I'll read it again. I'll find it and read it again.
Hot brand. Steaming hot brand.
It makes me think of who's it?
Yeah,
Cream of wheat.
Yes,
or something.
yes. I started to think of my fiber intake for the day.
Stay away from the elephant the next day.
That's right.
It was
An
like
elephant with bran.
the steaming,
brand.
the huge,
So here's the quote. When the elephant of Jiashu eats steaming bran, the iron ox of Shanfu suffers a distended belly. The footnote alludes to this book and to a koan which says, when oxen in Huai province eat grain, the bellies of horses in Yi province are distended. Same thing. So these horses, these oxen, these elephants. This is all a play of consciousness. This is all just suchness, and we, in our perception, create things out of this. So we create an elephant, we create steaming bran, we're creating all these connections, we're creating all these things out of this just pure suchness. And it is all in a really, and it is Indra's net. To say it's all one is to kind of miss a point. It is all Indra's net. Everything reflects everything else. Everything reveals everything else. Everything is contained within everything else. So we're trying to paint pictures, and it's literally painting pictures with words that allow us to deconstruct our pre-existing picture. And what the way this is doing it is saying, you're hung up on this elephant over here, and what was the other animal?
Ox.
It was an ox. The elephant over here and the ox down here. You're hung up on these two different things. And no, that's not what's really happening. And it's not to pretend there's not an elephant here that's being fed, but it's to break that mold apart completely and paint the picture with different symbols in a way that hopefully you can see that the elephant really isn't an elephant. And here really isn't here, it's everywhere. And we don't, I mean, particle science would tell you, a photon does not experience time. So yes, it'll take a defined period of time in our frame of reference for a photon to move from the elephant to the ox, but from the photon standpoint, there's no time passed. What does that mean? Our physics and our math is simply the best description we have of reality. It's not reality, but what that's saying is the best description that the religion of science has come up with to describe the world today absolutely agrees with what we're saying. There's no time between it. The separation we're creating with these isn't there. Does that make sense? Does that not does it make sense? Does that help?
Yeah. It helps a lot.
So just a little bit lost.
Kevin has a
Kevin,
question.
did you have something? Yeah.
It was, horses and animals like that will eat grain because they like it. It tastes good, but then it will really, it can actually make them deathly sick. And so there's a bit of a literal, there's a real veterinary thing from horses eating grain and that kind of thing, and so I was taking it a little bit more of a literal, someone's clinging, clinging to something that feels good, but actually, that karma will extend beyond them. So that.
So if you want to stick with the karmic story for a moment, which is a good one, Kevin, thank you, then absolutely, and it's still saying the same thing, that our naive, simplistic understanding of karma as being what's happening just in this little square box right here, right now, is wrong. It's too limited. Karma cannot be understood that simply. It's not that we shouldn't do our best to understand it and work with it, but we do need to recognize that karma is much more complicated and utterly entangled and acts in this same way. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, folks. It is the witching hour. It is 9 o'clock. Thank you all for your practice. Thank you for your support of Red Clay, and thank you for the wonderful conversation. Lovely to see everybody. Zoom, we will say goodbye. And I hear the kettle boiling next door, so just know that we're going to have a nice cup of tea and some cookies, soup cookies that Clay has brought in for us.